All right, let's get things adjusted. Auto. Hello, everyone. Excuse me while I finish the setup. What do we like here? We need it to be taller. What's that like? Maybe down, but then... Whoa, have we lost signal somehow? Oh dear. G'day Stephen, g'day Albert, bear with me. God, okay. This is odd. Why is it? I'm seeing something. Oh, that's better. That's much better. Now I'm getting things sorted. Okay, I was seeing something. I was seeing completely different, and that was because I had the webcam enabled. All right, now it should be better to easier, whatever. That was confusing. All right. Move that like that, maybe. Okay. Let's get this chair out of the way. Ignore the absolute mess of the background. Right. Move it all out of the way and pretend that it doesn't exist. All right, here we are. Finally ready to start. Maybe... Ooh. That's better. All right, that's enough toying with the setup. Welcome. G'day, Brian. Maybe I will fiddle with it a little bit more. What is going on here? No? The desk doesn't want to go down because it's... Ah, there we go. All right. All right. Different start, yeah, absolutely. It's called I've been out all day and came home and haven't had time to set everything up. Anyway, now that we're all here, we can properly start. So updates is first, and the biggest update is that I've added a third iMac to my collection. I never thought I'd say that, but there you go. And so what that means is that I will finally complete the repair of my computer and everything will be back on track. So it's been a long 6 or 8 months, whatever it is now, but I'm confident that this will be the end of it. But yeah, oh, and we got a new microphone there. I mean, I have had that microphone for a while, but I figured out a way to connect it to the computer. And I thought, you know, a lav mic theoretically gets better signal than the normal shotgun mic that I use. That's what's normally giving us the audio, but not tonight. Yes, technical difficulties, Stephen. As usual, I hope not. Yeah, I hope not. But Elvis says 3 non-working iMacs becoming 1 working iMac. Actually, only 2 of them are not working. The third one, which I've just bought, is fully working, and I'm still going to do part swaps to bring it right up to spec, but it shouldn't be too difficult because I've done it all before, and I deliberately got one that was fully working so that I can be guaranteed that the screen will work with the logic board, and yeah, it'll be an interesting experiment seeing how this whole thing turns out, and how much money I actually end up spending, because I think I'm about $1,600 down at the moment, but I expect to sell off maybe $1,000 of old half-working iMacs. So yeah, yeah. Tonight's topic, of course, is I didn't change the title. I've just realised, but the title in the thumbnail is correct. But let me change the actual video title. 38, and what was my exact wording? You can tell I've done zero preparation. How I edit my photos. Okay. Edit my photos. Save. Alright. Alright, so yes, that is the topic of tonight, is how I edit my photos. And I chose the thumbnail picture carefully. It's obviously of trams, specifically the Ballarat Tramway Museum, and that is because we are going to be editing photos of my trip to the Ballarat night tram, or at least that's what we'll start off with, and we'll see how far along we get. So bear with me while I move windows around and do other stuff. Okay, that can go like that. And yes. Stephen said probably could have saved a little bit for a more powerful gaming computer. I didn't want a powerful gaming computer. I wanted to fix my iMac. And yeah, then I wanted to, I won't be, although yes, I have saved up $1,600, I want to gain some of that back. So I don't know how expensive the repair is going to be exactly in the end. My net cost, I'm expecting around $500 plus or minus $100. But yes, you can now see the thumbnail picture. Now, so yeah, I guess this is the first thing that I can talk about. When I import my photos, I use Lightroom. Lightroom is a program by Adobe, and it's not like, it's similar to Photoshop. In fact, I think its full name is Lightroom Photoshop, but it's different in that the photo editing capabilities are less there, but still a good amount. Less than Photoshop though, and its main purpose is to sort your photos as well. And yeah, when you edit a photo, it's all in a non-destructive manner. And what I mean by that is that I've still got the bloody webcam on. There we go. We're back to the proper camera. Yeah, what I mean by that is that the original file isn't changed. How Lightroom works is that it has a catalog file that is saved onto your disk, and stored in that catalog file is a reference to the original file, and then a note, if you like, saying here's all the edits that were made. And so yeah, then Lightroom applies those edits when you open up the image, and you can sort of see it real time. So the first thing that I do when I've come back from a day's photography is I import my photos and using Lightroom, and I've got this folder structure that you can see here on the side. So it's basically the top level folder is the year. So in this case, for this photo, it's 2018. And then I have a couple of very broad categories of the things that I take photos of. So personal events, which, you know, could be anything. I mean, what was it in 2018? Banksia Tower, that was for Open House Melbourne, a campsite, some night works, caving and waterfalls, like, yeah, just random other things that I've taken photos of, basically. And then trains, that's pretty self-explanatory. Trams, urbex, you get the idea. And so within trains, for example, there's a lot. I only did one tram thing on 2018. But yeah, you can see I'll have a folder for basically each day that I've gone out, but it can be more than a day. It's the subject that's important, right? So if we collapse that, we go to 2017 trains. You can see like Farewell Sea Lake Broad Gauge, for example. These photos were taken over a few days, and I piled them all into the same folder. Whenever you select a photo, you can see on the side panel here, the metadata was taken at 10:05 and 47 seconds in the morning on the 16th of September 2017. Yeah, it tells you all the other info. But collapse that. So yeah, once I've copied them all into my folder, we find that, collapse that. Ballarat Illuminated Night Tram, that's what the name of this folder is, because that's the name of the event. And you can see there's a lot of very similar photos in here. In fact, if we go all the way here, you can see there's 499. Obviously, I'm not going to post 499 photos. The reason why you end up with so many, and specifically so many similar photos, is through the use of what's called burst mode on the camera. What that does is you hold down the shutter button and it goes click, 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 and takes a bunch of photos. Why would you want such a thing? Well, if you want to capture a moment in time and you know roughly when it is, but it would be hard to time to the exact moment if you were just to take a single shot. So you overcome that by taking burst photos. And obviously you couldn't do that in the film days, or you could, it would just be supremely expensive. But in the digital, who cares? If you rattle off 100 photos, it doesn't cost you anything apart from, you know, the space. And that's something I do have to be conscious of when I'm out photographing stuff is, you know, is my SD card going to fill up? I try to keep it free enough so that it won't fill up in a day, but there has been a couple of times, and that's mainly due to me forgetting to delete the photos from the last time. And yeah, I have certain methods, like I've spoken about this before. I think that if I take the SD card out of my camera, I leave the SD card door open so that I don't go and pick up my camera without realising, oh, hang on, the SD card door's open. That means I haven't put the SD card back in. That means I will hopefully never take off without an SD card in there. Having said that, guess what happened today? I took off without an SD card. But that was because I was getting my camera back from repair, and the SD cards are here. I still haven't put them in. But yeah, I just forgot to bring them, but it wasn't a big deal. Normally that doesn't happen because I have the system, but the repair shop said you better take your SD cards with you. So I'll quit rambling about that. So yeah, burst photos, we've got to sort them out. How do we sort them out? Well, in Lightroom, you can rate a photo 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars, or 0 stars. And when you import them, by default, they'll just be all 0 stars. Now, you could use the star system to sort of rank how good you think your photos are. I sort of do that, but slightly differently. What I mean by that is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars each sort of represents something, and so then I can more easily sort with that. Yeah. So I guess we'll start. This is the first photo, and immediately I noticed that it's pretty dark. But does it look alright? Yeah, looks like an alright photo, just a bit dark. That's no problem. We jump into the develop module, and this is where you can do all of your adjustments. And while that may look very daunting, and it certainly is at first, a lot of it's not too bad, but it does take practice to know exactly what each slider does, or each thingo here like that, and know how you can work with them all to create a good photo. And when you're really experienced and you're sort of doing the same sort of things every time, then you can create what's called a preset. And that's what we see on the side here. You know, anyone who has Lightroom, you can even buy and sell presets if you want. Some people like to, but I've just made the presets for myself. Just throwing it out there, if anyone else does use Lightroom and would like to use my presets, I don't want any money for them. Just give me a message, shoot me a message, and I'll send you a link. You can download them. But yeah, so as we said, this photo is a bit dark, so we can raise the exposure. That's looking all right. And now the sky is very bright, so we can just bring the highlights down a bit. Maybe the exposure down a bit as well. But it's hard to balance the sky. We can always quickly hit a key to jump forwards and backwards between before and after. That doesn't look too bad. Boost the shadows a bit. That's looking a lot better. I still, when I'm editing my photos, I'm still trying to remember back to the time that I took the photo and going like, okay, what was it like seeing it in real life? That's sort of what I'm aiming to replicate in a way. So I don't want the photo to be, I don't want it to look like daytime, like I don't want it to look as if it's midday when it was actually dusk. Get me? So you can see a bit of orange glow over here. It was just before sunset. And in fact, if we go back to the library module, I'm using shortcut keys, whatever you want to call them. We can see, yeah, 6:30 almost. So we go back to the develop module. Now, I could go and play around with these sliders forever, or I could look at my presets and go, okay, what's something that would work? We can see what's Wimera like, Wimera 2 maybe. Click on that, give it a minute. Okay, interesting result. My thoughts are everything's a bit bright and maybe a bit too much contrast. So let's drop the exposure for one. Try and get it to a reasonable level. Yeah, something around that. Maybe drop the shadows a bit. Maybe less contrast. Looking all right. It's still, yeah, a bit contrasty. So we could play around with that. Yeah, that's looking all right. So I guess I can go through a brief explanation of what all of these different sliders and things do. So the first thing we see here, or I guess I'll start here, which is the profile. I always have it as Adobe Color. It can change things a little bit. It's really just like your starting point, because various cameras, the image that comes directly out of them will look slightly different across all cameras. And especially raw photos, the software has to interpret them a little bit. And so the profile, being Adobe Color or whatever, it sort of gets everything to the same starting point. And yeah, you can go from there. Temperature and tint. If you ever heard of like the temperature of a light bulb, as in the temperature of the light which comes out of it, the color temperature, as it's called, that's what this is. It's sort of like, it comes from a physics concept called black body radiation, and it sounds fancy, but what it really means is you imagine an object which is absolutely perfect at absorbing all light. So it's perfectly black. That's where the name black body comes from. Now it turns out that if an object is very good at absorbing light, it's also very good at emitting light. So it will be a perfect emitter as well. And so where the color temperature comes from is because if you heat up this theoretical black body at various different temperatures, it will emit different frequencies of light. And at about room temperature, something around there, it emits infrared light. And that's why you can get infrared cameras that effectively see in the dark, because all objects do emit light. It's just that they will be emitting infrared light, a very small amount of it, because of the heat. And yeah, that's how infrared cameras see. And yeah, it's not, obviously it depends on the object a bit, but if you heat it up a bit more, if you think of like a block of metal that you heat up and it starts to glow red hot, well, there we go. That's, again, black body radiation. Now you heat it up and it becomes what you'd call white hot. Well, really that's more like yellow hot. And you can get all the way up to blue hot and beyond, which is what stars are. But yeah, that's another way that little fun side fact is how we know the temperature of the sun is because it emits, or the temperature of not only the sun but very far away stars, like thousands of light years away. How we can tell what temperature they are is by looking at what frequencies of light they emit and translate that into a temperature. So that's cool. Long story short, temperature and tint are very similar, and it's sort of like you've got to tune the camera to see the colours of light that are being emitted. Your eyes adjust automatically, and your camera does as well, but the camera will sometimes get it wrong. So this allows you to change that. So, you know, it got it pretty spot on this time, but we can make it way more yellow, or we can make it way more blue. Give it a moment to update. There we go. It's most noticeable if you've got artificial lighting. That can really play havoc with your camera. But yeah. So looking at some comments, hang on. Yes, that was a good night, wasn't it, Stephen? Stephen was with me on this day that I took this photo. He was probably standing right next to me when I took that photo. G'day, MarTV. Roderick says, how many viewers have significant film holdings predating digital? Has the whole audience grown up with digital only? I wouldn't say too many have film, but Albert says he has a bit of film, but not great amounts. I think I've got one roll of film that I took myself, that's medium format film, 120. Stephen says, I wish I had proper film besides my DSLR. My dad has his SLR, but doubt it works. There you go, Stephen said he was standing next to me. All right. So a very long-winded discussion of colour temperature. Exposure, that's a lot more simple. Obviously, it's sort of the overall brightness of the image. Contrast, well, that's pretty self-explanatory as well. It's how contrasty the image is. But overall, right, you can adjust contrast in other ways other than the contrast slider, if that makes sense. It's probably confusing. So if I have a large disparity between highlights and shadows, that's high contrast, right? So if I reduce the highlights and increase the shadows, then there's sort of less of a difference between them. And so there'll be less overall contrast in the image. So yeah, you're controlling, a lot of the sliders will have an effect on each other, but in different ways. So like when I adjust the highlight slider, it is adjusting the highlights, but it's also adjusting the contrast a little bit, but only insofar as the highlights. Whereas if you play with the contrast slider, the difference will sort of go like that, fairly even. But if you just adjust the highlight slider, it will just go like that, or the shadow slider like that, if that makes sense, the different brightness levels. And while I'm hovering over these, you can see that different parts over here are lighting up. This up here is a histogram, what you call a histogram. Histograms aren't exclusive to photography, although a lot of photographers seem to think that they are, only through naivety of not knowing any other applications of a histogram. Its applications are in other sort of analytical, scientific applications, really. But while it looks complicated, it's really quite simple. It's basically a bar graph, right? Everyone knows what a bar graph is like. So on the bottom axis here, this is the brightness levels. So 0% bright over here, 100% bright over there, and 50% brightness in the middle. Now the vertical axis is how many pixels in your image are at that level. So how many pixels are at 0% brightness? Nothing. How many are at 25%? Well, a few. What about 30%? Quite a bit. We've got a big hump around 30%. And then not much around 50%. Nothing much until you get 90%, and then, whoa, a lot of pixels. But how do you even make sense of that? Like, okay, cool, that's what it is, but how does that apply to the image? How do I use that to my advantage? Well, we see this big spike over here that is the, very high 90%. Well, we'd expect that because, hello, we've got a large amount of sky in the photo, and the sky is, reasonably bright, reasonably white. And so, yeah, we'd expect a large amount of pixels to be in that range. Again, down here, we've got a, fair bit there. I don't know what that might be, like the shadows underneath the tram, something like that. And this big hump here is probably all of the tram, all of the shed, all of the gravel and grass and whatnot. So you'll notice that if we adjust the highlights, you watch the histogram, although the whole image is changing, it's really affecting just this part of the image. Let's put that back to where it was. So yeah, the histogram, there's a common photography technique which says that for a well exposed image you sort of need the histogram clumped around the middle, and while that's a good general rule, it's just a very general rule. That's what I'm saying, is that it won't apply to every photo. And if you understand what a histogram is to begin with, then you can sort of see, well, does it reflect what I'm thinking? Does the histogram look like it's supposed to, given this scenario? And so a histogram can sort of help you take out variations in what you might perceive as a very bright photo, or a very dark photo, even though it might not actually be that way. Look at the histogram, look at the photo, go, think in your mind, is this what I would expect it to be? And just see if they match up. And if not, well, change things accordingly. Shadows, obviously, is adjusting the shadows in the image. And by shadows, it sort of means, you see how, if you look on the histogram again, if I hover over shadows, a range pops up from roughly 10 or 15% up to about 30 or 40%. That's sort of the range of values that it's most affecting. Whites, well, that's going to be affecting just the very brightest parts of the image, and blacks, well, again, affecting the very dark parts of an image. Playing with the black and white sliders can help give a bit of pop to your image, if you like. Roderick Smith says, I'm a Photoshop user. I have GIMP on the laptop, which I use when travelling. It's harder to use and is less capable, but is free. Any viewer who hasn't tried post-processing could start with it. Absolutely. And I think GIMP would have a lot of the same controls as Lightroom. And I do go into Photoshop sometimes. Rod, I know Rod, and Rod uses Photoshop because he's processing film photos. Lightroom would be good for cataloguing film photos, probably not so much for post-processing them, because a lot of the way that a lot of old film photos can turn out, it really is a Photoshop job. But you can actually use Photoshop in conjunction with Lightroom. Use Lightroom as your catalogue and use Photoshop as your editing software. But Rod's got his own system and it works fine for him, so I'm sure he'll be sticking with it. Texture, the texture slider, that sort of increases the medium details. Clarity increases the very small details, so yeah, again, it can sort of just help make your image pop. Dehaze, well, yeah, if your image is hazy, you can use it in that way, or you can use it the opposite way to create haze. But even if your image isn't hazy, you can just use it to increase sort of large level details. Vibrance and saturation, two very similar sliders. Saturation is reasonably self-explanatory. How saturated is the image? Do you want it more saturated or less saturated? The vibrance slider does the same, except that the saturation slider applies to the whole image equally. So if you say raise the saturation by 4%, it will raise the entire image saturation by 4%. Vibrance, on the other hand, it ignores the grey areas of the image, and so if it was a perfect grey, it would ignore it completely and it wouldn't add any saturation to it. If it was close to grey but not entirely grey, such as the ballast, you know, there's a bit of a blue tinge to it sometimes and a bit of a purpley yellowy tinge to it over here when the light is reflecting off it. So yeah, it's not a perfect grey, and vibrance will affect that area less. It can, using the vibrance slider in place of saturation, can make the colours look better in the image without getting the ballast or something looking really fake, put it that way. Tone curve. I'm going to go get a glass of water and then I'll be back and we'll talk about the tone curve. You can probably still hear me. And we're back. Got to be careful of water near computers, but I'm usually pretty careful. So the tone curve, actually let me just shut my door. The tone curve, let me move to the next image and then we'll talk about tone curve, because then it's perfectly flat and you can get a better idea of it. It's again a sort of graph, if you like. There's the histogram you can see behind it, just it's the exact same, just in a shorter amount of space. The tone curve, the bottom axis over here is your input axis and your vertical axis here is your output. So we haven't changed anything, and so it's a perfectly diagonal curve or straight line, which means that the input is exactly the same as the output. The 0% brightness over here, 100% brightness over here, again 0, 100. What in the image where we can say where it was originally 50%, we want it to be more than 50%. So you can see I've put a point in here, and now the curve's looking like that. So over here, if we go input, you know, that's what, 25%, and and then 30% over here. So in other words, the parts of the image that were originally 25% bright are now 30% bright. We can do some fancy things with the tone curve. A common shape is what you call the S curve. So maybe if we just brighten the image up a bit and then you'll be able to see it better. We can do that and then that. So you'll notice that there's a lot more contrast in the image now. Why is that? And why did that sort of shape make that? Well, because we've said we want to make the shadows a little bit darker and the highlights a little bit brighter. More contrast. This just allows you finer control over the roll on and roll off. All of the sliders are effectively doing the same thing as this. It's just you get more control when you do it this way. And so you'll work in a combination of the two. So going back here, you can see in this photo, I've said that actually I want the darkest parts of the image to not be so dark. I want them to be a little bit brighter. And the shadows, I've said, yeah, maybe a little bit darker. The midtones staying about the same. Highlights a bit brighter. But the very, very brightest parts of the image, I don't want them to be so bright. Now, these are all sliders here. These are what you call your Hsl sliders, or hue, saturation, luminance. These are obviously the different colours in your image: red, orange, yellow, green, aqua, blue, purple, magenta. You're just going around a colour wheel there. And the hue is sort of like what colour it is. So here I've said the greens, I want to shift the greens to be a little bit more on the yellow side. And I want to, again, with the aquas, I want them to be a little bit more on the green side. And so on. I haven't touched the reds, oranges, purple, and magenta in this preset. Similar thing with saturation. Again, just finer control over, yeah, you want saturation, but which colours do you want to be saturated by how much? Luminance, brightness. You want to brighten different colours by how much? Which colours? So you can use these Hsl sliders to sort of, in extreme cases you can correct for abnormalities, but even in a perfectly good image to begin with, you can sort of shift things to be more in a style which you like. It's really a creative decision. Now I haven't really touched these. I'm still kind of learning how to use these because this is a fairly new feature. But effectively what you can do is you can adjust the hue, saturation and luminance of the midtones, shadows and highlights individually. So, lots of control. Sharpening, how much sharpening do you want? You generally don't want too much, but a little bit is probably right. And the radius, that's sort of when you touch the sharpening slider, it is sort of looking for the pixels around it, and the radius is telling you how many pixels around it. So in this case, 1.4 pixels. Detail, again, that's just sort of playing with what you want. How much do you want it to pay attention to the details in your image? Which you don't necessarily want it paying attention to the absolute finest of details. Like you might not want the ballast to be too sharp, but you want the tram to be sharp. So that would be where you'd adjust the detail. And masking is sort of selecting for the edges. And if I hold down Option and click, give it a minute to catch up, there we go. Now you can see all of the white parts of the image are what it has found as an edge, and it will sharpen. All the black parts are what it's ignoring and won't try to sharpen. The reason why you want to adjust such things is because the sky doesn't have any detail, and you don't want to try and pull out detail that doesn't actually exist in there, because that could lead to funny little artifacts in your image. Noise reduction. If you've got noisy photos, you can use these sliders to adjust how much noise reduction do you want. Again, how much sort of attention to detail, and what sort of contrast levels of the noise do you want. I've turned this up to 100, which is saying remove any color noise. Color noise, the Lightroom algorithms do a really good job at removing color noise without affecting the rest of the image, whereas the full-on noise reduction, it does affect the image. So I tend to not use much noise reduction at all, only 7%, as you can see here. But I've gone up to 100% color noise reduction. Not that there was much here to begin with, but yeah. Detail, smoothness, same thing, just adjusting if you need to. Profile corrections. This box, remove chromatic aberration. What is chromatic aberration? Well, it's present in all lenses. Higher quality lenses deal with it better than others, better than the cheaper lenses, I should say. But I mean, yeah, what it is, the lens, obviously, the different bits of glass inside your lens bends light in different ways, right? Now, unfortunately, light is a pesky thing, and lower wavelengths of light bend slightly differently to higher wavelengths of light. So what can happen is you'll have the blue wavelengths, for example, being deflected down a bit more, and the red wavelengths deflected up a bit more. You'd preferably like them to be in exactly the same spot, but oftentimes that doesn't happen, and so they can sometimes become separated, and they will to a certain extent in every single lens. But again, the more expensive lenses deal with it better, and by deal with it better, what I mean is they will have an extra bits of glass in there, so that if the front element splits the light like that, the back element might split them the opposite way, and so it effectively cancels each other out. that's a very simplistic explanation. Now, yeah, chromatic aberration, you just tick that box and it does a pretty good job at removing any, if it was there to begin with. We can untick that, and if we zoom right in to the tree, which is like, you often see it on edges. I mean, I've got a pretty good lens, so I can't really see any, but we tick it and yeah, it improved things ever so slightly. But hey, the good quality equipment means the computer has to do less work. Now, enable profile corrections. That is dealing with distortion and vignetting. Distortion, there's really two types of distortion. There's concave and convex. So if you think of a perfect grid, would that perfect grid look like it has a bulge in it, or would it look like it has a dent in it? Again, all lenses have some level of distortion. The more expensive lenses have less distortion. They deal with it better. And they do it in a similar way. You know, if the front element bulges it like that, the back element might dent it like that. Obviously very simple, and you can start to get an idea of the sort of things that lens designers have to compete with, and why it's another reason why you'll find the more expensive lenses have more glass in them, because there's more corrections that need to be done. I mean, lens sharpness has a lot to do with that as well. You know, the glass some glass will make it more blurry, some will make it less blurry. You don't want to overdo it, so you've got to perfectly balance for each other. Big props to lens designers. So that's distortion. Vignetting, that's where you have darker edges than you do in the center. I guess you could have the opposite, but there's no lens that I know of that has the opposite. It's usually bright middle, dark corners. And if you think about it, a lens is circular, right? So it will really be the whole outside of the lens is a bit darker than the inside of the lens. And again, that's sort of just a property of light. But yeah, there's various ways that you can deal with that. And all lenses have vignetting. More expensive lenses deal with it better. And so distortion and vignetting, the amount of the two changes depending on the exact lens you're using, the exact camera that you're using, the exact aperture you're using, the exact focal length you're using. Even exactly where it was focused can affect it, the distortion and the vignetting. Now, the good thing is we can measure all of those sort of things in a laboratory setting, and we can create what are called profiles for. It's basically just a guide for the computer to say, for this aperture, this camera, this lens focused at this point with this aperture and this focal length or whatever, all of the different aspects which affect vignetting and distortion, how much vignetting and distortion are we left with? Once we measure that, we can go, okay, let's record that and apply the exact opposite effect digitally. And so then the bad will cancel out with the good, and we'll be left with a perfectly flat, non-vignetting image. That's pretty cool. Wonders of modern technology. And so you can see here that the lens profile, it's a Sony FE lens with the model 16-35 f4ZA OSS, and so it's using the Adobe measured profile. And that's one of the reasons why you might choose Adobe Lightroom over some random other photo editor, is because Adobe have got the money to measure this sort of thing and put it into a form that you can just tick a box and it figures the rest out. So yeah. And finally, transform. If your photo was taken in a not perfectly level way and you wanted to correct for that, you could use those things to correct for that. And constrain crop, that just means like when you're trying to correct for a rotated horizon, for example, you're trying to get that horizon flat again. When you rotate the image, now it's not perfect, and so if you tick constrain crop, I guess I'll just give an example of, you can see if I rotate this like that, now we've got white bits in the corners where we rotated it. But if we hit constrain crop, it gets rid of those white corners perfectly for us. But if we undo those things, we're back to normal. Rod Smith says, a lot of photo advice doesn't apply to transport. It is based on people and scenery as subjects. Yep. That's very true. And so that's why, while I think that the advice that I give of looking at what's in your image and sort of seeing, does the histogram reflect what you expect to see, I think that advice is practical for general photography as well. But a lot of photographers just spout the same, oh, you need to balance the histogram in the middle because everyone else says you have to do that. So I'm a fan of understand what your tools are actually doing and then make decisions based on that. Don't just do something because someone said so. Do it because you know what it does and that's what you want it to do. Rod Smith says, a lot of vintage photographers have strong vignetting. It was even a desirable technique for portrait work. Yes, and that's why you can add in vignetting on your own if you want to. It is still desirable for some people, for some photographic situations. But yeah, vignetting and distortion. Present in all cameras, and yeah, it was particularly present in older cameras because lens technology wasn't up to scratch. And so, yeah. And I guess while we're on the subject of lens technology improving, if your parents have got a collection of old lenses or whatever, and you know they had really good prime lenses for their time, and you know some modern cameras, such as my Sony, you can adapt old lenses to fit on your camera. In fact, my mum has got an old SLR and a bunch of old lenses, and I did buy an adapter so that I could put them on. Not because I thought they would be better quality, but just to see how they looked, basically. A lot of people like to put old film lenses on because they're not perfect. They're not squeaky clean. They have their own characteristics to them. And yeah, some people can find that desirable. But where I was going was to say that the best lenses of 50 years ago are worse than the worst lenses made today. If you're looking at pure scientific objective image quality. And of course the best lenses of today are still very good lenses. But yeah, consumer lenses are getting very good these days. You could be quite happy with a cheap lens that was made in the last 5-10 years. Very happy. The lens which I took this photo with, I think it cost about $1,000. So not very cheap at all. Probably more expensive than a lot of people's cameras that are watching this, but hey, you get good quality results. And there's always the rule of diminishing returns. When buying cameras and lenses, you can spend double the money, but you won't necessarily get double the quality. I could have chosen to get an even more expensive lens for my camera. Would it have been better? Yeah, it would have been. By how much? About 10%. Did I want to spend double the money for 10% better? Not really. So I spent $1,000, not $2,000. Whoa, a lot of rambling. Brian Wilson says, not used Lightroom, this is all new to me. Well, glad you're learning something. Roderick says, if the image is close to the edge, Constrain Crop fails. Instead, fill the white with adjacent tones. Yeah, that's more of a Photoshop technique. Oh, thank you. This is turned up. Yeah, I mean, look, if you were just doing all of your, you can't really just you can't do content aware fill in Lightroom. That's a Photoshop technique, and so I would say just use Constrain Crop. Yeah. If you're doing it in Lightroom, who cares? The only exception I'd make is that if your photo was already very tight, but you still needed to correct the horizon, and it was, say, off by a lot, and Constrain Crop would crop in too much, that's when I'd say, okay, move over to Photoshop, you know, do something else, like content aware fill on the edges. Referring to old lenses, Roderick says, a lot of early telezooms couldn't cope. Now they are standard. Yeah, if one of your parents was taught on film cameras and they haven't really transitioned to digital cameras, something they might say is, oh, don't buy a zoom lens. They're not as good as prime lenses. Yeah, that's true. They're not as good as prime lenses. Prime lenses will always be better. But zoom lenses used to be bad quality. Now they're pretty good quality. Prime lenses are even better. But yeah. And going back to what I was saying about the worst lenses of today are better than the best lenses of 50 years ago. Again, the best primes of 50 years ago are worse than the worst zooms of today. Hopefully that makes sense. Bit more chocolate. Let's reset this. Okay. So yeah, this image. Now we're going to speed up a bit. What do I think of that? It's right. I don't think I'm going to go any further with that. Going back to this image and what I was saying earlier on about the star system of rating, I'm going to give this a 3-star, which in my categorization system means if I ever post this in a big album, if I ever post these photos as a big album, I'll probably include this one. But if I'm just posting stuff to Instagram or, you know, in small batches, probably not going to include it. This one, yeah, I'm going to rate it a 2. 2 for me means I don't really plan on publishing it in any way, but I don't necessarily want to delete it either. What's this like? So this is a photo of the tram before it's lit up. I think we can do something with this. Let's see what WinRAR 2 gives us. Usually it will, oh, that's getting nice. Usually it will give me real-time previews, but because I'm trying to stream while doing this at the same time, it's going a little bit slowly. But what do I think can we do to this? I think decrease the exposure a little bit and then perhaps bring up the shadows a little bit more. I still want the feeling of it being dusk, sort of, or not quite dusk, but getting there. you know, we've got the lights on inside. So I want that to show. I want that to be noticeable. I'm not perfectly square onto the tram, but I'm alright actually. Perhaps I could have shifted a little bit, but yeah, it's not too bad. 4 or 3? I'm going to give it a 4. So that means that I'm going to probably publish it on Instagram or in other small batches. Next photo. Okay, behind. I'll apply the preset to it. See how that looks. Better than I was expecting. Let's try raise the exposure a bit more. Oh, let's go a bit down. This is actually looking all right. I like that this area here is quite dark. I like the brightness of the background, but I want the tram itself to be a bit brighter. We could raise the shadows, but that's going to be affecting the whole image, you see. Now, I think that's affected the background too much for me, so I'm going to pull it back. I'm just looking at the background as I'm adjusting things. Okay, how much do I want? Somewhere around there, maybe. I'm going to drop the blacks a little bit. A lot of these adjustments will seem really subtle to you if you don't have a trained eye. I found that when I was first learning to edit and I was watching editing tutorials on YouTube, I found that, you know, a lot of them were just, they would say, oh yeah, they'd make a really fine adjustment and go, oh yeah, I really like that. And I'd go, I didn't see anything change. But then when they showed the before and after of all of their edits, then I could see the difference. Point is, it takes practice to get a trained eye. The more you do it, the closer you'll get. Whites, yeah, not too much. Maybe drop the shadows a bit more and just increase the whites. Yeah. Drop the overall exposure a tad more. Yeah, I'm liking that. Except we've still got to deal with this tram. We're going to use this, which is, I forget what you call it. I'm going to call it a circular mask or an ellipse mask or whatever. What is it actually called? Radial Filter, there you go. And so what I've done is I've just drawn a large ellipse over the tram, and these are the adjustments that are going to happen purely inside of this ellipse. So at the moment the default is being raise the exposure by one stop. I'm not the biggest fan of that, so I'm going to reset that. I'm going to look. I like the destination sign. I think that doesn't need to be brightened. Not much, at least. So maybe I'll give it just the smallest amount of brightness, like 0.2-ish of a stop. Now I'm going to raise the shadows. Yeah, it's looking better. Well, I'm noticing that it's affecting the background a bit, so we'll just tighten that ellipse. And maybe tighten up this way a little bit, so it's more in line with the tram itself. I don't want to go overboard. Let's close that. And what does that look like? Pretty good. Now, since it's a vertical photo and I'm going to rate it a 4 to post it on Instagram, not because it's vertical, but on Instagram, the highest vertical aspect you can post is 4 to 5. So we're going to crop it. I'm going to change the aspect from original, which is 3:2 or 2:3, to 4:5. Now we're going to adjust that so that it's more central on the tram, and those grid lines are just a good reference. What's that like? Pretty good, although I think I want to raise it a little bit. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Although now that I'm seeing it on this level, I would like to drop the shadows of the background a little bit. Maybe drop the exposure a little bit. Not too much. Maybe drop the highlights. Yeah, I think that's nice. Really, yeah, shows the detail in the sky while keeping a good focus on the tram. Good edit. Pretty much same photo but in landscape form. I really like the portrait mode more. I think the portrait aspect is better, so I'm going to rate this a 1, which means that I don't really want to keep this photo at all. It's good sometimes to take both portrait and landscape orientation photos and just see which one is better, and in this case we found portrait is better, so we'll delete landscape later. Nice photo of my friend Michael. Well, we've got a lot of dead space up here, so I'm first going to crop it to 4 to 5, even though we don't necessarily have to. And preset 2 again, see what it's like. Yeah, not bad. Although Michael is looking like he's in a bit of a shadow, so let's do that. And let's reset that. Yeah, that's looking all right. So, yeah, I'm going to rate it a 4 because it'll be posted or sent to Michael individually. And in this case, we're going to also give it a green label. You'll see it just appears green in the grid view. That is just another way of sorting things. Often I will take photos of friends such as Michael, and I want a quick way after I've done sorting out all my photos to say, okay, I just want to find all the photos of friends, And so that's why green is a label that I can choose. It's just pretty arbitrary. It's just, I think there's red, yellow, blue, purple. I think that's all the different colours you can get. Yeah, it's just different things that you can use to sort. Oh, nice photo of the tram lit up. Let's see what this is like. Just looking at my presets, seeing maybe the stations after sunset. Perhaps that will be a good one. We'll raise the exposure. It's quite a dark photo. That's not looking too bad. Yeah, okay. We'll give that a 4 and we'll move on. We can always revisit it later. Oh, okay. Now I've just noticed here that we've got two very similar photos. We've got that one and we've got this one. This one, generally if I've just taken two, it means the second one is the better one. So what we're going to do is we're going to right click this and say develop settings, paste settings from previous. Ta-da! Now, compare these two directly. Oh, yep. This one is the better photo. So we're going to label that 4. And we're going to label this one 1. Because we don't really want that one anymore, because this one is more square onto the tram. Alright, what about this one? I think the stations after sunset preset worked well. But again, we're very dark. I was trying to make sure that the LEDs weren't overexposed, but yeah, and the shed, maybe do that. I'm liking the general exposure of the whole site, of the whole photo, but I'd like the tram itself to be a little bit brighter and maybe these people as well. So draw a radial filter over there and maybe have it over there a bit. Yeah. I'm just going to adjust shadows here, I think. Yeah, that's looking all right. No, looking back on it, the tram is probably a little bit bright now. I'm seeing too much of the sides. That, yeah, maybe just drop that a bit. Yeah, I'm liking that. 4. So yeah, from here on, I would pretty much just continue on doing the same sort of things. Although if I was lacking for a bit of time, what I might do is say, just scroll through the grid view and look at, say these set of photos catches my eye. Now looking at that, I can see, okay, there's a bit of motion blur in that. So we're going to just scroll back in time for a bit and see, okay, what about that? Is that motion blurred? Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I was using a 50th of a second, which is a reasonably slow shutter speed. That's not looking too bad. What about this? No. This one's really the best, but it's not quite as far along the tracks as I would have liked. I'm gonna deal with that one another time, I think. Once I find the best one in a group, I will rate that best one 3 or 4, and then find the rest in the sequence of burst photos that I took and rate them all a 1. What's this like? Yeah, it's alright. I know I've got better photos. It's looking alright. I'm looking for some photo which is like just really wow. I mean, well, this is an example. I've already edited this one, but yeah, you can see they're very similar. If we go to here, we go before. Right, so that's what it looked like before, and then that's after. So before, after, before, after. I guess I'll just run you through the things that I did. I mean, I've got a history here of what I did. I used the Wimmer 2 preset, although now I'd probably use the Stations After Sunset preset. Doesn't really matter. Didn't really do too much apart from maybe adjusting highlights and shadows a bit. And I used Radial Filters in 2 places. Firstly on the tram, where I adjusted the contrast, highlights and shadows a bit. And secondly on this street lamp, because this was a situation where if we go to the original, you'll see that this street lamp looks very green. That's because it's fluorescent, and fluorescent light tends to emit a lot of green, whereas the tram lights are all sort of a tungsten-y colour, and it looks a bit conflicting. I really don't like the green, and so I've just applied a pink tint, which is the opposite of green, to correct for that. And a little bit, I considered doing it in this area where the light is shining, but I think I decided against it because it wasn't too distracting. But up here, yeah, I really wanted to make that less green, so I did that, and I also darkened it a little bit so it wasn't as eye-catchy. So yeah, I would just go through that, and because now I've found that's the best one out of the sequence, I can go to the grid view and I can see that, go to the start, see, just have a quick scroll through, see, okay, people jumping onto the tram. It could, yeah, probably not. don't really want to keep those photos. Sometimes people in the photos can be good. A lot of railway enthusiasts like to, and tramway enthusiasts, like to get rid of all people in the photos. I think people can add things. Having people in your shot can add things. They can detract at times, but yeah, don't be deathly afraid of people is what I'm saying. But anyway, I've selected all of these, which are all in the group, and just press 1 to rate them all 1 star. So yeah, you really get the idea. And so if I go to Colonial Express, this is really the epitome of what we end up with after we do it all in the end. What's this red stuff? It's just an artifact, it looks like. Thank God. Didn't want any image corruption. But I haven't deleted those photos off my camera yet, I don't think. So if there was any corruption, I would be able to check if I could salvage it. But yeah, so now, look, we originally had over 2,000 photos in this Colonial Express event. That's a lot, even for me. But you can see I've labelled them different colours with different star ratings, whatever. So now we can use this attribute to sort them. At the moment, I've just said anything with a rating that is greater than or equal to 4 stars. So you can see these are all the photos which I rated 4 stars. You've probably, if you follow me on Instagram and stuff, you've probably seen all of these photos. That's because I posted them. And this, sorting them like this helped me figure out which ones to sort and in what groups. So like I've chosen yellow to mean a photo that has some sort of carriage detail, something about the carriages, because, you know, that was a significant part of the day. Green, well, that's friends, photos of friends. Even a photo of myself and Michael there. And so what I can do is I can say I want all green photos. And then I can select these and send them all to Michael. That's a lot easier selecting them that way than trying to find them in the great big haystack. Oops. So yeah, you can say I want all yellow and all green, for example. Any colour you like, including no colour. And yeah, this is what you end up with. And I can even say 3 stars. That ends up with even more. I could say I only want the 3-star photos only, but not 4 stars. There you go. Although generally I just want that. And I can go just the photos which are equal to 1 star. And I can select them all. Hit delete. I won't do that. Oh, you know what? I will. Delete from disk. Permanently delete files. Because, yeah, I don't need them. But generally I would go at the end when I've gone through, I'd like to go through this set sort of one last time go through all of the ones which I haven't specifically given a star rating to, and yeah, I don't know if they actually deleted. Permanently delete. Okay. Yeah, 1 star means I definitely want to delete it. 0 stars means I maybe want to delete it once I've sorted everything. So yeah, I think that's all we're going to cover tonight. Yeah, it's a bit of a process and it's very time consuming. You know, I'm more likely to just pick out individual photos that I want to edit, and whole groups of photos will often go years without me getting around to doing a proper sort of them. That's just the nature of things. I don't have to delete photos. I'm not short on space. Whenever I have become short on space, I've just bought more storage. Made sure that, because really, in terms of my photos, the time needed to sort them is my biggest constraint. Money, well, it is somewhat of a constraint. I can afford the extra storage when I need it. It's not such a big deal to me. For you, might be different. In that case, yeah, be more proactive with sorting your photos. But for me, I've got 12 effective terabytes in my network attached storage, which is built off of an old 2008 Mac Pro. Just one last thing if I get back to, whoops. I'm just going to show you one last thing in the edit suite actually. This is a good example. If I want to make a note of something to do with this photo that isn't evident purely within the photo, such as the carriage number, if I was like, I remember it was something X, I can't remember it though, what was it? I could go to the previous photo and see, 40X. But, I've just put a little thing in the caption. It's called caption, but I'll use it for, just putting in little things like 40X. If we go forward, there's 69YZ. So carriage number is just an example of something that you would note in the photo. But it could be anything. I know another example. This photo. I've written down that it was Mickleford Castlemaine Road. I didn't record that on the day, but I knew that that's Mickleford Station in the background, and it's the first crossing after Mickleford on the down. So look that up on Google Maps and record, oh yep, Muckleford Castlemaine Road. Or sometimes if I find a different photo, like this one maybe, nope. Oh, that's right, it wasn't working on the day. What I was going to say is sometimes the camera doesn't have a built-in GPS, but it can connect to my phone, and it's a little bit dodgy. It doesn't always work, but when it does work, it's really good because it connects to my phone and piggybacks off the GPS on my phone and records that as a GPS coordinate. I'll try and find, like, yeah, here we go. Obviously, we know where this photo was taken. It was taken at Muckleford because the station sign is there, but my phone has managed to connect to my camera and we've got the GPS coordinates written down here, so we can click that little arrow, give it a minute, and there we go. It's shown us on Google Maps. This is where we are, Muckleford Station. The GPS coordinates are, while, you know, it's fairly obvious on a station, if we go to this photo here, you know, we're in the forest, we're in the bushland. Which forest bushland is it? Well, I've written it down here, Muckleford Nature Conservation Reserve, midway between Muckleford and Castlemaine. But I knew that because the GPS recorded, and in fact I've written Castlemaine, but I should say Muckleford and Malden. There you go, made a mistake. But GPS allowed us to correct for that because it showed us that the photo was there. Would you have known that it was that particular forest and not this particular forest? Probably not, without, unless you're a VGR regular, you probably didn't know that. I certainly wouldn't have, so thank you, GPS. If GPS fails to record for some reason, or it's just not an option with your camera, you can often do some investigation work and sort of go like, okay, well, I know that I've got photos back here at Muckleford, so we were heading towards Malden, so it must be between Muckleford and Malden. Where are we? Yeah, it could be somewhere in between. Like this, well, yeah, this one. Muckleford, yeah, so pretty much straight afterwards we can look at the map and go, yeah, it was probably taken about here. So yeah, you can often work it out. If it's just GPS obviously makes it easier, but it's not necessarily impossible, and it's worth writing down those details while your memory is relatively fresh. Even 2-3 years down the track, it'll be more fresh in your mind than 50 years from now. So, yeah. Looking at Thingo's comments, Adventuring with Matthew Jane says, I love Lightroom on my phone. It's also connected to Lightroom on the PC. Absolutely. And I do have the Lightroom app on my phone. I don't tend to do photo edits on my phone. the Lightroom app, it's got a built-in camera on the phone app that can take raw photos. Yeah, that can be good if you don't have a proper camera, because raw photos allow you a lot greater flexibility in the editing suite than JPEGs. But I don't tend to take raw photos on my phone anymore because I found it was too much of a hassle. I'll just take JPEGs, but what I do use the Lightroom app for is for syncing photos between my main phone camera roll and Lightroom on the desktop, and then once every couple of years I'll go through and sort out all my photos on my phone, but do it from my computer. Sorry if I keep hitting the microphone, not used to having it on. Floyd, if you set your camera to take JPEGs and RAW, or do you only take RAW pics? Good question. I only take RAW. JPEG and RAW simultaneous can be good in two circumstances. Number one, if you just want to share a photo immediately, JPEG can often be easier to share. Scenario two is my camera is an expensive one, so it's got two SD card slots. One of those slots is faster than the other. So generally speaking, I will record simultaneously raw photos to both cards at once. That way I've got a backup. As soon as I take the photo, I've got a backup, which is really nice to have. Although I've never had an SD card fail on me, I know that it's a matter of when, not if, so backup is nice. But yeah, one of the slots is slower than the other, right? So although take raw photos simultaneous to both is fine for all normal circumstances, if I want to take a fast burst, lots of burst photos, that can slow me down because I will be constrained by the slowest card slot. If I switch to RAW and JPEG, I can say, hey, RAW photos, write that to my fast slot, and JPEG photos, write them to the slow slot. RAW photos will take up a lot more space, but they will be, they'll take more space, but because the raw photos are writing to the faster card, the time it takes the camera to write the raw photo to the fast card is about the same time as writing a JPEG to the slow card. Hopefully that made sense. So, in other words, it doesn't slow me down as much, and I can continue taking burst photos for longer. All cameras have an internal buffer. My camera has a fairly large internal buffer, being an expensive camera. So most of the time I don't bother turning that on. I just let the buffer deal with it and try not to be too trigger happy. But on the occasion, I will change it over to shoot RAW and JPEG. Yeah. And just while I'm mentioning RAW files taking up a lot of space, I think SD cards these days are so cheap. 128 gigs SD card, you can buy one off Amazon for $30. Yeah, there's no real excuse, I think, for in terms of filling up an SD card. Yeah, I don't think that's a reason not to shoot RAW photos. Keeping them all on your computer, yes, it takes up a lot of space, a lot more than JPEG. Again, for me, I'd rather the flexibility, and if I need more storage, I'll buy more storage. It's not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. And you don't have to go out and buy 12 effective terabytes. I say effective because it's 16 raw terabytes in a RAID 5 configuration for you computer nerds. So it basically just means that it's split across 4 disks. The data is split across against 4 terabyte disks, and with RAID 5, I can lose any one of those disks and die, and I can just swap it back in, swap a new one back in, and I won't lose any data. Yeah, it's not a backup, but it's a nice thing to have. It's a way of gaining some redundancy without spending too much money. And so, yeah, you don't have to go to a fancy setup like that. I started off on a 1 terabyte portable hard drive. You can go to Officeworks and buy one for like $80. I think if you've looked around online, you could probably find one for $50 these days. So, yeah, again, like, that's the cost of a tour. If you're a RAW enthusiast, yeah, just buy that. Start off with that, and then work your way up. Maybe buy a second one as your backup. Very important to have backups of some form. And yeah, then you slowly build up over time. Now I'm on a very, very large amount of storage. How much of that 12 terabytes have I used? About 5. How long do I expect that to last me? About another 5 years. And in 5 years' time, I'll have the money to get another few terabytes. That's the way things work. Yeah. Roderick Smith says, what happens at the edge of your radial mask when you adjust the interior? Nothing. That's the point of a radial mask. You can adjust the feather on the mask, so it won't be a hard, this side of the line, nothing, this side of the line, everything. There'll be a bit of a transition phase, and yeah, you can adjust that. But basically speaking, outside of the radial mask, nothing. Having said that, you can also do an inverted radial mask, which is where you, it's the opposite. You affect everything outside the mask and nothing inside the mask. And I guess on that note, I will perhaps, can I find a good example of what I'm trying to look at? Yeah, this one will do. So I'll go back to screen capture. So if we look on this photo, I've also, not only have I got, I think I've got radial filters, or maybe not. Oh, well, I put a radial filter to do something with the locomotive or something. I can also have this, which is called a graduated filter. I do have a graduated filter. And so that means that on this is what the effect I've applied is a darkening of the exposure, but the way that a graduated filter works is that it will be 0% applied at this line and 100% applied at this line and 50% at this line. So it graduates from 0 to 50 to 100 in terms of the effect. And I can control, you know, where those lines sit, what angle those lines are on. And the reason why I've put a graduated filter in there is just because I felt the roadway was a little bit bright for my liking, and I just wanted the attention to be more focused on the locomotive and the train. So that's just another example of what you can do. And the other things while we're here, that's crop, spot removal. So if you had a bit of dust on your image, you would use that to remove the dust. That's for red eyes. I don't even own a flash anymore, so, and my camera doesn't have one built in either, so red eyes are not an issue for me. But if you took a lot of flash photos and you often had people with red eyes, that would help with getting rid of that. Looking at more comments. Stephen says that was also a great day, referring to the Colonial Express. Indeed it was. Stephen was probably right next to me taking that photo as well. There you go. And Roderick says, this is the difference between digital and film, the quantity. Even though I am now digital, I'm sparing with what I take. Yes. Digital, you'll take a lot of photos and it can take a lot of time to sort out, but you know, I won't necessarily edit an entire batch of photos. I will just look at them in grid view, select a couple that I want, edit them. So the selectiveness is in the post phase, not the pre phase. I would rather take a lot of photos on the day and then pick out the best ones and just post them and delete the rest. Yes, Stephen was filming J549 next to me. Cool. And Matthew James says, yeah, my Sony a6600 only has one SD card slot, so I've got a 512 megabyte card. Are you sure you don't mean gigabytes? I also shoot JPEG and RAW at the same time. I only ever shoot single shot. I never seem to shoot in burst mode. It depends on what you're taking photos of. If you're taking photos of moving trains, burst photos probably helps. Probably would help you. If you're like, I shoot on single shot most of the time, but then when things start moving, that's when I switch to burst. But yeah, if you've got a 512 gigabyte card, that is huge. Overkill for my needs. I don't know about you. I don't know how often you import your photos. I would recommend importing your photos as soon as you've taken them pretty much, so that you've got a backup, you know, because SD card failure, hard drive failure of some sort, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Always, 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 I can't stress that enough, always have a backup. Preferably multiple backups. Personally, as I said, I've got the RAID configuration, so although that's not really a backup, it sort of is. I can cope with 1 out of the 4 hard drives failing at once. Then there's a bit of time needed to rebuild the 4th hard drive if it fails. And I put a new one in, and if 2 hard drives manage to fail at once, or there's fire or theft or a power surge that destroys my computers, something like that. You know, there's various events which can happen. I pay a monthly subscription to a company called Backblaze, and that is where I've it's cloud backup, which you can consider off-site backup. As long as Backblaze, the company, exists, and as long as I keep paying them, I will still have that backup. If Backblaze ever ceases to exist, or I switch providers or something like that, yeah, I'll always want to have some sort of off-site backup, because stuff can happen. And the last thing I want is to be losing all my photos. I mean, how many thousands have I got there? I mean, you know what, let's do a quick calculation. So for 2013, we've got 1254. 2014, we just had 800. 2015, we've got 3667. And keep in mind, I've deleted a lot of photos. 2016 is 14. What is that? 249. 2017 is 11617. 2018 is 21,596. 2019 is 11,185. 2020, not many compared to the rest of them, 2,193. 2021, so far, 7,879. So I've got a little, slightly shy of 75,000 photos. That's a lot. Don't want to lose any of them. If I choose to delete a photo, that's because I've carefully reviewed everything and I'm happy to get rid of that photo. I also, you know, I'll export photos, and I've got different presets for exporting. As you get more used to Lightroom, you can do stuff like that to just help speed up your workflow. Presets are great for if you're doing the same things over and over again. And what I'll do is I'll export the photos to various folders. Then I will transfer those photos to my phone, and that's one of the reasons why a couple of people have asked me why don't I just go with a PC instead of a Mac, since these Macs are so much of a hassle to repair. Software is the big reason that I don't switch to Windows. I like the software integration between Macs and iPhones. It's very easy to transfer photos through AirDrop. I do it all the time, and various other things I won't get into, but nothing against Windows, I just like Mac. And while I have my dislikes, is not enough to deter me from buying more. Matthew James says, sorry, gigabytes, yep. I'm happy to use the JPEG if correctly exposed in camera, but great to have the RAW if you need more room to move. The bigger card is great for video as well. I mean, I do video as well, but yeah. 512 is overkill for me. Maybe not for you. And you have triple backups of everything. Good. Just make sure you have at least one on-site backup, as in at your house. That way you can cope with a normal hard drive failure, something like that, and at least one complete off-site backup, so that in the case of fire, flood, theft, whatever, you're not left without your photos and videos. Patrick says, looks like 1000 Urbex flicks when my laptop broke last year. Oh, lost like 1000 Urbex flicks when my laptop broke last year. Still gutted. And that's a classic example of why you should have had a backup. Because sometimes you get notice of when a hard drive is about to fail, sometimes you don't. Patrick also says, can't remember where I heard it from, maybe past stream, but I think you said you went to La Trobe Uni. If so, how far is it? Because I'm planning on going for e-commerce. I go to RMIT University, and I go to the Bundoora campus, which is close to the La Trobe Uni. What was the question? How is it? I mean, I like RMIT on the whole. I've got friends who go to La Trobe and they're happy. In terms of unis, do your research, go to the open days if they happen, talk to people, talk to students at open days and stuff. If you know anyone any like older family members who've just recently gone through uni or something like that, talk to them. Just talk to people, see what the courses are, see what you like. It's not the end of the world if you go to the uni, go there for a semester or a year and find, no, don't like it, move to another uni, or even say uni isn't for me to begin with. That's a little brief thing. Anyway, we've been going for well over 2 hours, so I think that it is time to end the stream. Hope you learned something. I didn't think this would go on for 2 hours, but there you go. Now that I've got holidays from uni, I will hopefully be editing a lot more photos and, fingers crossed, editing some more videos. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching, and hopefully the next stream will be a cooking one, but we'll see. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.